Hello there, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to tell you about this movie that I watched recently. It is called The Covenant and it's directed by Guy Ritchie. This one falls under the genres of suspense, drama, action, and military and war. So this one is a story about a group of soldiers who are in the Middle East, Afghanistan. I think this is loosely based on the war in Afghanistan. When I looked it up, it did say that it's not based on a true story. However, loosely based on events and relationships formed during the conflict in Afghanistan. So the main guy here is John Kinley, who is a squad leader. This is played by Jake Gyllenhaal. And then we have Ahmed, who is a local. He's been working with the Army squadron there, and he was assigned to Jake as a translator. He knew a lot about vehicles, and so he had been helping with that, but he got on as a translator. So he is riding around with him, and their job is pretty much to seek out weapons caches, and then defense against the Taliban. So one day they were about to go out. They got some tip about some weapons. And so we see a group of them outside. They're looking over the map and then figuring out which direction to go and all that. One of the locals who were part of the team mentioned that they should go in an opposite direction than what they thought they should go. And his reasoning that he gave was that because of recent rain, that the roads in that direction was washed out. So he was sending them in a different direction, which wouldn't normally make sense, but I guess that reasoning that he gave was logical. So they're like, okay, they don't have any intel to say that this is not true. So they went ahead and they were going to go ahead with the plan. So they're driving in that direction. And when they were, I don't know how far into the journey they were, but they had traveled a good bit. And Ahmed said to Kinley, who is the character played by Jake Gyllenhaal, Kinley, that something doesn't feel right. And so he said there's no reason why we should be coming this way because this area is not affected by the rains. And so his Kinley is pretty much his boss. So his boss didn't really quite believe him, but he was insisting that something is not quite right. So he stopped and he asked a couple of the guys in the convoy to go ahead to a lookout spot to see if they see anything. And they got their binoculars and looking, and they're like, oh, it's clear. And then when they came back to the vehicle, Ahmed had, I guess he must have, hit the guy with the rifle because his nose was bleeding and he was on the ground. He had his gun to the guy's throat, the guy who had given them that direction, and he was like, you're a traitor. And so Kinley is trying to get him off of him, like, get your gun away from him. Get your gun away from him. And so before this whole scene is over, one of the guys they had also sent a drone as well. And so before this was all over, they realized that there was some guys, and there was a trap set. So they ended up, going back in the opposite direction. But they were saved that day because of Ahmed. So anyway, I guess because they didn't catch them they didn't fall into that trap, they probably tried again, because we see where they were going out on another mission again. And so this time they were going to this mine that they had some intel on, some weapons. And so when they went to stop there were some guys outside, and he asked, are you the landowner? He's like, yes, but there's nothing going on here. You probably want the other property down the street. There's a plantation there or whatever. So he's pretty much trying to send them somewhere else. And so Jake and Ahmed, they decide, okay, thank you for the information. We'll go ahead and look there next. But they wanted to see what's going on the compound because it was an old mine. They still had infrastructure there. And it seemed like they were doing something there. So while they were there looking around, we see that there was a guy who was in the building using a cell phone reporting back. And so he's reporting to his higher ups. And so they had pretty much walked into an ambush. And before you know it, his whole platoon was pretty much one by one getting struck down. We also see where there were bombs going off. So it seemed like they had really set up a trap, and whoever had given them the information, I don't know if they knew or not, but it seemed like this was really planned because there were bombs rigged. around the place. And so there were tons and tons of Taliban forces who were coming in. They were on the hillside, so were on a higher elevation shooting. Then you had people who were arriving via trucks, and then you had the bombs, and they had the people who were on site already with weapons. So there was a huge shootout there. And so John and Ahmed were pretty much the only one left. They even blew up that Hummer that they had that machine gun on. All the other guys one by one. So they had to try to escape. When they tried to get to their vehicle, they couldn't get to it. So they went off in one of the Taliban's open back Toyota trucks. And so as they were going down the road, speeding off, the Taliban convoy was coming after them. And so his tire went flat, so they had to go abandon the vehicle and head off into it's not really woods, but into the landscape, basically. So when the Taliban pull up, they knew that they were out there somewhere. They couldn't be getting anywhere because, it's all wilderness pretty much. So they reported back in. The first person that they talked to, who's one of the top guys, said, "Kill them." But then the other guy in the corner said, "No, bring them alive. I want them alive." So their search was on for them. So they were out there in the woods, and then finally at nightfall they decided to stop. And so when they stopped, Jake's character, John Kinley, was just sitting there. He pretty much had no words. It seems like he was trying so hard not to cry. He was just frustrated. Adrenaline probably ran out at that point. And then we see Ahmed looking at him, and he just doesn't know what to say, and he's just there looking, and they both just didn't have the words. So then we see where probably early morning, then, they hear noises, so they have to try to evade those forces as well. And so, they're being tracked through the wilderness and trying to stay alive. We see at one point they were going down a really steep hill, and so they're just pretty much boogie boarding on their butt down the hill. And in that process, Ahmed lost his weapon, so I keep calling him Jake. John Kinley had a handgun that he ended up giving to him. It's like, don't lose this one. And so where they were in the valley, and so the Taliban forces that were in the area were in higher elevation. So it was a matter of time, even though they were being careful, that they would get spotted. And so ultimately that's what happened. So we see where Kinley and Ahmed were there taking their time. Kinley noticed the guy up in the hills, and so he's like giving the hand signal to Ahmed, back up. And so he's slowly backing up. So as he's backing up, there are two Taliban guys at the top of the hill, and they make eye contact, and so they're looking, they both freeze, and then all of a sudden they're pulling their weapons, so he had to shoot them down. And prior to this, he couldn't fire his weapon because that would give away his location. And so now they didn't have a choice to save their lives. They had to fire the weapon. And so, of course, this makes things worse. And so they were able to escape, but Kinley was injured. And so we see where Ahmed made a makeshift kind of cart and, to pull him to safety. And his plan, I don't know what his plan was in the moment, but, at one point he had stopped. He had a vehicle, and then at one point he had stopped, found a group of local farmers, and, he told them that he had somebody hurt and they needed medicine and all that. But the main guy there said, "You're lucky. I don't like the Taliban, so I will help you." And so he gave them medicine. I guess Kinley needed opium. He said that's what he needed. And so they provided that, and, him and his cart. And so they took off. The guys told him that they would have to take the mountain passes, and so he couldn't be on any main road. So we see where he's traversing over very rugged landscape with this cart. The cart has Kinley, I keep trying to say Jake, on it because he's injured and can't walk. So it's like day and night, he's pulling and pushing and pulling and pushing. I was just like, oh my goodness, I felt so bad for him. But these contractors or locals who are working with the army and trying to help them, at the beginning of the movie does mention that some of those people who work with the army are, given special visas, for their cooperation. And so this was promised to him to be able to get him and his wife out of the country. And I think that's probably a part of it that drove him to be, day and night and going through all this attacks, evading the Taliban and pushing somebody up the hill, down the hill, through the valley. We see at one point where he was on the top of a rocky hillside. It's just a rocky road, but it was really high up. And the cart got stuck, and so he was pushing. He couldn't get it unstuck, and so he was just so frustrated. He's like, ah! And so we see where he's just sniffing, and he's just trying not to cry, but he's so frustrated. He's so tired, and so, oh my gosh, just made me want to cry. I just felt his frustration and fear and just everything that was going on. And so he took a second and he breathe in, breathe out, and try not to cry. And then he got back up and he's like, he got so angry. He finally dislodged the cart. And so it was, had to push and pull and push and pull until he got to a local road where there's a farm stand kind of. And so he asked for water. He paid for the water. And he, when he got the water, he poured some in Kinley's mouth so he could drink it. And then he drank some water. And I was just like so moved by that because he was the one who was doing all the work. I mean, he would rightly deserve to hydrate himself, but he didn't. He gave it to Kinley first. And I was like, oh my goodness, I just want to cry. So when he was there, then now here comes some guys from the Taliban. He's like, oh crap. So he had to hurry up and cover up Kinley's face. And so the Taliban, what do you know? The guy comes and props himself on the cart. And they were demanding something from the vendors who were on the side of the road. And so the one guy who was by the cart, he's looking, and then he saw feet, and then he's looking, and he didn't know what to do. And so Ahmed is just looking in the other direction and slowly using his hand to try to get something out of the cart. And so right when the Taliban guy decides to do something, then Ahmed had to quickly get his weapon. So there was a shootout there. And so right when that happened, and he was like, oh my God. Then we hear a vehicle pull up, and I was like, oh my goodness, don't tell me this is more Taliban coming. And so it turns out that this was some military guys who were with the army, and they were like, threw him on the ground, handcuffed him, and then of course they realized that he had Kinley. And so we see where Kinley was rescued, and I was like, oh yay. So they're all, happy ending for both of them. And so that wasn't quite the case. We see where Kinley is back home. However, when we see where he's at home in his backyard and he's talking to one of his army buddies, and they were saying that they would have given Ahmed the visa, but they couldn't find him. So we know that Ahmed is missing. And so what he's saying is that because he rescued Kinley and he became some kind of folk hero, that there's a huge bounty on his head from the Taliban, and they want to kill him. So he had to go underground with his family. And so they do not know where he's at. And so Kinley feels a whole lot of guilt because the reason why Ahmed's family is in danger is because he helped him. And so he's having a lot of guilt. He's having trouble sleeping. And so he decides he was going to do something to help. So he would call all these different agencies, call them the immigration services, hours and hours on end on the phone, every day, hours and hours. And so he was getting really frustrated. It was taking a toll on him. I just realized the level of bad customer service that can exist with these government agencies, because he said he was on hold for an hour and a half. And, he was just trying to do what's right and hold up his end of the deal with Ahmed. So he decides, you know what? He was going to pull whatever strings he had to pull. And so there was a general or a higher ranking person that he knew in the army. And he was like, I saved your life once, and you're going to get me these visas. I don't care what you're going to do, but you're going to get them a visa. Because he went through trying to call this agency, this department here and there, talk to a supervisor, and wasn't getting anywhere. And so he decides that he was going to get him out of there. He owed it to him. Although his wife didn't want him to do that, or didn't want him to go back into danger, she decides that she would agree to remortgage the house and allow him to do that, and he needs to get back safely. So we see where he's saying goodbye to his family, and he's going to go back to Afghanistan. So it was a ton of money. I think it was almost $250,000 for it to be able to get the support that he needed there, get back, because he had to have contractors to get him in the location, to spot him, to be able to extract him when it's time to get out, for materials, cover, all that. So it's a hugely expensive endeavor to get back in there. And what do you know, when he gets back in there, he showed up. He finally found Ahmed, and he showed up and sat down. And Ahmed was working on a vehicle, and he was like, he said something, "Oh, why are there so many dogs around here?" And then Ahmed looked up, because he had said that before, and he looked up and he was so shocked to see him. So he was trying not to show any emotions, and not trying to look, because people were watching, and trying to stay cool. But ultimately, the Taliban found out that Kinley was back, and so, of course, they're ready to kill him. So they had to hurry up and be able to get away and be able to get Ahmed and his wife and young baby. I think the baby was 3 months old or around there, very young baby, to be able to get them out. And so there's a massive shootout on one of the bridges that they were on to be able to get out of town, because, of course, the Taliban doesn't want to get them out. And so I was very scared for them, and especially the baby. Of course, his wife doesn't have any military training, so I'm sure she's scared to death. But in the end, though, they were able to get air support from the army, and were able to get rid of to subdue the Taliban forces that were, coming upon them, because they were about to blow up the bridge or something like that. There was a lot of manpower, and to be able to get out of town, they needed to use that bridge. And so it would have been almost impossible to be able to get out without the support of the air support that finally came for them. So it was very nerve-wracking. My heart was pumping. I was scared. I want to cry in some parts of the story. And towards the end, they finally were able to get out. When the air support came and they were able to exfiltrate them out, the guy who was the contractor who was supposed to do the transportation is like, "Why didn't you tell me you were John Kinley? And why didn't you tell me you were the Ahmed?" They didn't know who they were contracting for. So they were happy to help and to be able to get them out. And so we see where when they took off, and we see they panned to the visas, that he finally had the visa. And so he looked at Kinley and nod, and then you see Kinley look back to him and nod. And so in that moment, he was saying thank you. And of course, Jake was happy to be able to keep his covenant that he had made with Ahmed. So it was a happy ending towards the end. And I was just like boo-hoo crying. I don't know, a little bit emotional on this one, but this is an action, but it will definitely have you tear up. So if you love action movies, especially military action, this is a good one. I did enjoy this one from Guy Ritchie. Definitely recommend this one. If you haven't seen it,